Well, firstly, mate, thank you so much for joining me, Charles. From what I understand, you're in Parliament House right now.
I am.
Are you in the Channel 9 studio where the famous Peter Harvey come from? Like, is that the room you're in?
He would have done some stuff in this room, yeah. Yeah, it's one of them. We have a couple of studios here. Now, he also did a fair bit of stuff out the front of the building.
Oh, loved it.
Back before we had the benefit of studios and at the old Parliament. But this is, he would have twinkled his toes in here at some point.
It's quite an important job to be selected as the political editor for an Australian news network, because politics is by design, I think, confusing.
Yeah.
We're deliberately kept befuddled so we don't know what the fuck's going on. So having someone to go, here's what that means, is really important for us as a community.
Yeah, you sort of have to turn on to politics before it turns on to you, is the old Ralph Nader saying. And that's sort of, I don't know, it is increasingly, I think, important. And as the political parties and the politicians themselves get better at, if something's not going their way, making it confusing, then, you need people here. The other thing about this job that's gotten, I think, better, but certainly harder, is that it's no longer just, John Howard talking to Alan Jones 3 times a week that you have to decipher. It is so much content coming down the line through podcasts, social media, different interviews, that you have to stay across. That's a good thing. Like, I think it's good Australians get to see more of their leaders and therefore make a more informed choice. It just makes our job a little harder, but that's why you have to rely on a pretty good team.
You clearly love it. I've seen footage of you. I've watched podcasts of you. I've watched podcasts. It's so wild. Yes, I've watched podcasts of you, and I believe you're in your office. And if I'm not mistaken, you have on your wall behind you, you have a photograph of Julia Gillard eviscerating Tony Abbott, and you also have a photograph of the handshake that shook the nation when Mark Latham and John Howard met. You're clearly a nerd for this. When did you realise you loved it more than everybody else?
I used to get up pretty early in the morning as a kid and watch debating on television back when that was a thing.
What?
That's not a normal thing to do.
No.
So
I didn't know it existed.
Then. Yeah, well, like 6 o'clock or 5:30. My parents loved that. So I was into it from a pretty early age. And then I loved the sort of the not just the theatre of it all. I'm a sports mad person, so I like the competition of it all. And then the fact that this is a genuine way out to help people is good too. My dad's a coal miner, so he was involved in ways in the union movement. So I sort of got that side of politics. He and some of his mates were quite senior in it. And then Mum was a small business owner, so she was on the other side of those things, talking about the importance of small business policy. So it sort of blended in a weird way for a country kid to have this love of politics. And you have to, I said, we have a great team here, and all of them, regardless of if it's behind the camera, in the edit suite, on camera, they all have a passion for politics. And because it becomes so engrossing, you have to, and you have to have that. So it's a blessing for me, a curse for all my mates, and that's just the way it exists.
Yeah, you do. You do have to love it. You really do have to love it. You never, ever stop. The other people get voted out. You stay. So you've got to have an appetite for the fire hose of ups and downs, don't you?
Yeah, well, you do. And this is a good point. Also, like, people can get sort of disenchanted in these jobs too. Like, there are eras of politics that are really disappointing for everyone involved, and I think reflect badly on the country, on the people involved. Jump on Twitter and see what people think about the job we do, and it can be...
Mate, I haven't been on Twitter in a long time. Because
that's a pretty smart move, I would say.
On Monday, I did a podcast, just a monologue, just reflecting on it, and because it was a take I hadn't heard, and I kind of wanted to put it out there. Pretty much since before the voice referendum, like when the campaigning for that started, we have been told for nearly 2 years how completely different we are in our community, and that those people over there, they don't think like you, and they're idiots, and they're this and they're that, and those people over there, they don't think like da. But yeah, on Saturday night, our country showed that actually, as a majority, we think way more alike than we don't. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight.
Yeah, it is. The other thing is, I think the leaders are probably closer and more alike than we make out in the media, and that because it is a contest and because it is head-to-head, have to be exacerbated and exaggerated, the difference they have. I have no doubt, and I know you said this in the podcast, I have no doubt that of the 226 members of the House and Senate here, at least 225 of them are here for exactly the right reason, because they want to make the country better. And you know, Peter Dutton was one of those people. What he was doing was what he believed was best for the country. Now, it turns out that the bulk of Australians, when you go two-party preferred, didn't think that. But at least the sentiments were right, the patriotism was right. And this is what he thought was willing to fight and argue and debate and lose and cop that loss for, because he thought he was doing the right thing. It's the same with, you know, all the Labor leaders, even through that tumultuous stage of Rudd, Gillard, Rudd. I think they were doing what they thought was right. And that's something you sort of, I respect about the people in this building.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think sometimes gets lost, but I know you pointed that out. And it's what makes us lucky that we have leaders that have that mentality when, you know, liberal democracies are a minority sport around the world. Not everyone's quite so fortunate as we are. And it's nice to be in a country as painful as an election campaign is, and as annoying as voting can be. The alternative is really not that flash hot. And so if we can have this, that's a small price to pay.
It is important. It's worth pointing out that on Saturday night, the person who got the fewer amount of votes not only took it, but also then willingly said goodbye to the leadership of the party. He said, okay, I'm done, and respected that and walked. And that doesn't happen. In some countries, they don't give the keys to the mansion back. They keep the army. They go, no, that's clearly a fix. I'm not leaving. And we are so lucky that power in this case stayed the same, but sometimes power transfers in our country. I remember one day when Abbott got in, when I first moved back to Australia, Abbott got in and I was crestfallen. And my big brother said, power changed. Ideological ideas about how we run the country completely shifted overnight, and not a shot was fired. Never forget how important that is.
Yeah, there's I think it was Mao or someone has a quote about, you know, politics being war without the bloodshed, and war being politics with bloodshed. So this is a better option, right? We'll take this one over everything else. And you're right, you know, democracies are a system in which parties lose. It happened on Saturday night. It will happen to Labor again one day. Might take a little bit longer than I think anyone was expecting, but, you know, we're lucky.
We talked a little bit about the policies that were being pitched by the coalition. The big ones really were, you know, nuclear and energy was a really, really big player. Trump seemed to be on the fringes of, you know, that kind of politics being around and people understanding. But were there some kind of less obvious things that you pointed out, you realised had a role in the result we saw on Saturday? Yeah.
I think Trump was a huge factor, and more so just because of the instability and the uncertainty created around the globe. You know, we're not in 2024 anymore, and that sounds obvious because it's 2025. But in 2024, we had all these elections.
Not even 2024, man. It was like 106 days ago. It was a different planet.
Feels a long time ago, doesn't it? But like, you know, New Zealand, England, the US, even somewhere like India, where the government didn't lead, but there was a swing against them. It didn't matter who you were, what side of politics you're on, how long you'd been there. Voters were just hitting the ejector button. They wanted whoever was in to be out. This is different now. We saw it in Canada, where Mark Carney wins for the Liberal Party. That's the Progressive Party in Canada, to make things complicated. Pierre Poilievre was the leader there of the Conservatives for the last 4 or so years. He was a moral to win that election 3 months ago. He had a 25-point lead in the polls. He lost the election and lost his seat, just like Peter Dutton. And I think the turning point, if not the tariffs, now that obviously plays big in Canada because of how important Canadian and US politics are, but was that moment in the Oval Office with President Zelensky. I think in that moment, a lot of people who are on the fringe of politics or maybe just tuned in saw a bully and saw someone who had the respect of so many people around the world in President Zelensky, someone who didn't have the cards. Donald Trump was right, but someone being bullied by two people that did, and that rubbed everyone the wrong way. or probably a lot of people, a majority of voters. So I reckon that was the turning point that made everyone get a little bit antsy about what was going on in the world. Now, maybe it was the speech that needed to be given to President Zelensky. Maybe it's the wake-up call. We'll wait and see. But it certainly was the wake-up call that we are in different times right now, and that's been reflected in these two votes. You asked about other factors. Look, taxes are a big thing. I think Labor did a great job of keeping the secret, the fact they're going with income tax cuts. Now, I know it's $5 a week in 12 months' time, which isn't a huge amount of money, but God, that's better in your pocket than in the government's. And then it becomes $10 a week forever after that. The other thing was that student debt relief. Just speaking to people, if you're on the fringe or not interested or part of that big voting cohort that we now have, then that are young people, having 20% or whatever it was of your HEX bill wiped off must be an attractive option if you're umming and ahhing and where you go. So when you tie that in with the energy thing, which is such a huge part, nuclear has been given the thumbs down pretty comprehensively. Australians, I think, are past that debate over energy in many ways. We know that coal is going to fade. The coal-fired power stations are starting to get a bit long in the tooth. They have to be replaced. Whether it's gas that gets us to some kind of stability moving forward, if we can get hydro, be it green hydrogen or actual hydrogen power that's more reliable, or just look at people around Australia embracing rooftop solar. I mean, that is the great success story of this country that probably isn't told enough. That I think it's something like, over 50% of houses in Queensland, have rooftop solar. The mail's in. Like the jury's come back and made their decision. Now it's how we best take advantage of those opportunities, that being a giant island with lots of sun and lots of wind, and still lots under the ground, give us. That's going to be one of the big challenges for this government, because if they can get that right, it sets up generations into the future.
How can, supposedly the Economic Rationalist Party, the good parties, the coalition, the Australian Liberal Party, the Conservatives and the Nationals, which are further to the right than them. Clearly, they're very clever people. Like with the time I've spent in Canberra, it's almost like human chat GPT. You can say, look, I want to do this thing. And you're provided staff to go, can you go and find me all the things from the last 10 years and compare it to that? And people will go and do it and then come back and bring you the report. You don't have to be an economic superstar to have these jobs, but you have access to so many resources, so many super smart people you can ask questions. How did these guys miss that? How did these guys miss something like that figure you mentioned in Queensland, where people have voted with their wallets? I go out to Western Sydney sometimes to shoot stuff, and people have solar panels not out there. They don't do it because they love trees. They do it because it's hot as shit and aircon is free in the day. So yes, please, I'll take it, thank you. How do they miss that? How can you get into a situation where you miss such a massive signal like that?
Yeah, I don't know. We went to Bundaberg on day one of the campaign, and I was amazed with how many rooftop solars were up there. This is an area where, again, there's plenty of sun. These were probably lower socioeconomic parts of town, but they were still embracing it. I think, look, the other thing is, it's obviously expensive. It's hard to get people into rooftop solar, and there are many challenges coming down the line with making the most of it and disposing and renewing and getting batteries and trying to make sure that the grid still works with it. There's a big upfront outlay on the poles and wires as well. So I don't know. I think that's going to be part of a review that goes on. There's lots of parts of the Nationals were always pretty, David Littleproud's pretty pro rooftop solar. He sees the benefit of it, but this is all going to be part of a huge review that goes on into the direction of the Conservative Party. And Australia needs two strong parties. The best countries have two strong parties. And so it's a really important discussion that's going to be coming up.
You say you're going to have a review. Like, they already did a review. And they seemingly just ignored everything that it recommended. What's another review going to do? What does the opposition need to do in Australia to make sure that it can provide a strong opposition? Because if without a strong opposition, I'll let you explain it. In your opinion, why does democracy need a strong opposition?
Because all the good ideas don't come from one side, and you need someone to hold people to account. And if you get comfy, you can get lazy. If you get too influenced by just one idea, I think the best ideas come from a debate, come from a discussion and fully exploring each possible option. Australia, I'm worried about the comments here, but Australia did pretty well through COVID and keeping Australians safe, because there was an acceptance from the opposition at the federal level, but also a back and forth push. Australia has gotten through really tricky times in the past because there have been good oppositions debating, raising ideas, challenging when there are bad governments, and that's sort of the best system we have at the moment. Absolute power doesn't seem to work in too many places, and that's why all the strongest countries, the best places to live, are countries with democracies at the moment. You know, whether you can see the rise of China as the one that bucks that, I still think I'd rather live here.
I would agree with that. So in that, and I'm surely the people who are, I mean, what Angus Taylor's going to be the lead? I don't know. Like, what does the coalition need to do now, in your opinion, to give us the strong opposition, to give our country the very best chance of holding this power to account?
Yeah, it needs to. I look at a lot of those teal independents, and I think at heart they are Liberal voters. John Howard had the broad church. Robert Menzies created this party for that idea. Those teal MPs should be Liberals, but the party had left them, and so they created their own identity, their own brand, and have done quite well. It's going to be too hard for whoever is leading the Liberal Party to get back to power if they can't hold those seats, the seats of Julie Bishop and Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott and Bronwyn Bishop. I mean, the seats that was of John Howard and of Peter Costello. Where do you go? If you can't win those seats, it's too hard to argue for the people of Western Sydney while also trying to mount the same argument and win over Bondi. If you have one of those tied up, you can then sort of breathe life into the other one or focus on the other one. The other thing is obviously losing young people, and beyond everything else, it's losing women. I mean, the gender split from the internal party numbers that were coming to us were unlike anything we'd seen before. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but I think anyone in WA, including Colin Barnett, the former Premier, who said this publicly, looks at that vote in 2018, I think it was, when Julie Bishop put her hand up to be leader of the Liberal Party, running against Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton, and was pretty comprehensively spat out in that first round of voting and said, well, what are we doing? You know, in terms of qualified, capable, smart, well-presented women, if you're not taking a chance and at least getting Julie Bishop into the top two, well, who are you looking for? Who's the answer? And that's going to be part of that review. As you said, it was part of the last review, the one that Brian Loughnane and Jane Hume did. It identified women as a problem. Nothing to be learnt from the second kick of a mule, but they just got it, so it's time to learn.
When it comes to leadership in our country, though, what do you think, what do you see from the outside as being the inhibitor for people who do make great leaders, but like, I don't want to go anywhere near politics?
Yeah.
You know, how do we get the best people who can lead and show a great visionary idea? How do we get them to feel okay about going into Canberra?
I think we'll get more. I think what's happened, particularly in the last 15 years, and we've just lived through a really turbulent time in Australian politics. We had two effective, potentially even three, civil wars within the parties. We had the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years in Labor that wiped out a lot of talent. They sort of re-emerged, having held on to people like Penny Wong and Bill Shorten and Anthony Albanese. But there was a lot of talent, someone like Nicola Roxon or Greg Combay or Stephen Smith that got cast aside during those wars, even Wayne Swan, because you start losing people when people lose and you get these battlefield promotions. Then we saw it with the coalition. I kept thinking during this campaign, imagine if you had Josh Frydenberg there for Peter Dutton, or you had Christian Porter. Now, that's obviously a very different scenario, but someone who could have been a future leader. Someone like Kelly O'Dwyer, who'd taken the seat of Peter Costello and was a rising star but got out because she'd had enough. I mean, even if you had 2017 Barnaby Joyce, it would have been good for him. Malcolm Turnbull. There's all these, Christopher Pyne, people that were sort of spat out by the system. Even Simon Birmingham had enough. Like, good people that you lose, and therefore you lose all that sort of the talent and the institutional knowledge. Now, the Labor Party have come back. They've now got young people coming through, both here in Canberra, but look around the country. I mean, the people here will look at Peter Malinauskas in South Australia and say, like, that is the exemplar of a young leader with good ideas. He's stunningly competent, it seems, when it comes to actually governing. For the Libs, they would point to someone like, in the past, Gladys Berejiklian. Even Dominic Perrottet was pretty universally liked on both sides as someone coming through. So they've got to find someone like that. Chris Foley up in Queensland seems pretty good. Even Leah Finocchiaro in the Northern Territory's been around a long time and came through this same kind of wipeout that she had to re-emerge through. So if you're a Liberal, it is soul-searching time. And that's what they're going to have to do. There are a handful of backbenchers that are still here that could eventually, one day, rise to the ranks, but they're still 3 to 6 years away. It's just going to be forced upon them a little earlier than they'd hope. You
mentioned a couple of names there that their careers got sidetracked fairly significantly by the someone, you said I wouldn't worry about any comments, mate. Like, people can think what they're going to think. You're never going to change their minds, dude. No one's ever going to change their mind in a comment section of an Instagram post, so don't even try. Someone was at me going, "Oh, like, how dare you? That bloke's just lost his job, Dutton." I'm like, he's going to be working for Exxon like tomorrow. Like, how do we help people not be tempted by, dipping their finger into the bag, or B, help people when they're in power not set themselves up for 20 years of work with something that they've just written policy for?
Yeah, you've got to show that there is something that can be achieved by being a member of Parliament. And I think the fact that independents have become so prominent shows that they believe they can have a difference. David Pocock's a great example here in Canberra. He won, I would say, a surprise victory to get into the Senate 3 years ago. He has just romped it in this second time around, and he learnt the advantage of being the last person at the table when it comes to negotiations. He got some things he wanted done. I think he's going to still lead the charge for that, given where things are at. Beyond that, you're right about these people are human. I straddled this one myself too, because yes, they are. And again, I said they've all got the right intentions and they're good people. And then on the same note, on Saturday night, Liz Daniels and I were dunking them into a tank of water on a VR system on Nine's electric coverage. But it's because it's not their seat. It's the seat of the people. And if the people say you're not the right person to represent us, then that's the way it goes. You get a nice payout. As you said, there's probably jobs waiting, particularly for someone like Peter Dutton, who's been in there for a long time. But for those first-term backbenchers, it can be a tough time because your phone stops ringing. But also, it's not something you're entitled to. You are representing your area. That is something that very few Australians get the chance to do. And if the people decide you're not the person to represent them anymore, then unfortunately that's the way it goes. You get a payout, your staff get a payout, and best of luck with the rest of your career in a way that someone working at a steelworks, if it closes down, doesn't. Or someone working in the mining industry as it starts to transition, doesn't. They have to go train. We're encouraging them to do. There are jobs out there, and we should all be that way.
It's when someone loses the grand final, we don't give them a cup as well. They played the game knowing they might not win it.
Yeah.
And that's part of the gig, that they're willingly doing that. It might have happened to them in a long time. It might be a surprise, but that's that's the deal.
Yeah, I love a grand final as well. I think the stakes are a bit higher here. That's the other part of it also. I mean, not if the Raiders eventually make it, then it would be high. But
mate, I don't know about that penalty the other night. It was very slippery. But
we've had plenty the other way.
Abdo would have been like jizzing in his pants. 8:30, 8:45, Sunday night, pissing rain, golden goal, overtime, propane cannon, sweat, blood, open foreheads, penalty. Boom! It was fucking amazing game.
It was, after 5 weeks of campaign and probably 10 weeks of getting ready for it, that was the perfect finish to a
It was
Sunday
amazing.
night.
I was trying to explain to someone this morning about, she goes, "I don't care about sport." I was like, no, you really need to start looking at it, because it is the way that people who don't know each other, can communicate about something that they have in common.
Yeah, it's empathy, right? It's empathy for the emotion. I could tell you, I was flying back at one point from Perth on this election. I can't remember why we were in Perth, but we were. And elections are grueling, right? They're hard. It's a privilege to cover it, but it was a long time away in hotel rooms and not a lot of sleep. And I was watching Rory McIlroy win the Masters and just sobbing on the plane flying back to Perth. I'm not sure what the person next to me thought, but, that's what happens in these events with sport.
Because you care, all right? You cry over golf because you care. And this is what people need to remember. But that does bring up the emotional idea, and we saw it thrown around a bit. Talk to me, if you would, about the idea of weakness and kindness and accusations of either in this when it comes to our leaders.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And look, weak was clearly a word that came up in Liberal Party focus groups because they, for the better part of 15 months now, have been trying to paint the Prime Minister as weak. It clearly hasn't worked or hasn't worked to the effectiveness they needed. And I don't know whether that's because all of a sudden compassion has become more of a virtue. Perhaps the association with weak was easier for Donald Trump because you had Joe Biden in the office and physically he looked like he was deteriorating in front of us.
Apparently they had him hidden in the room and he didn't know where he was and they're like, no, just keep him in there. Don't let anyone see him. Like, it was clearly not – that was fucked of them to let him do that.
Well, and that's why the debate was the thing that ended him, right? We all saw it, what had been perhaps being hidden. But there is, it seems, a new era now where perhaps compassion is looked upon in a better way. I go to President Zelensky again before the war started. I don't think anyone would associate him with the word strong, but since then, I mean, it is compassion and empathy and stoicism and all those things that have made him such a guiding light for the West and for freedom and all the rest. So I think this probably is still an argument, and this is one I think you made in your analysis, that mentality that if you say it loud enough, you could be strong and wrong, but the strong part's what's going to be important, not the wrong. That still exists, but it's not as effective as it perhaps once was. And people might have cottoned on to the machismo as an answer. We'll see. I don't know. I still think in troubled times, people tend to drift towards someone they think is strong and is safe. But then, I mean, look what's happened. These are about as troubled times as we've had in the last 20 years. And the Australian population has said, well, we want Anthony Albanese and we want Labor. So either that continually referring to him as weak didn't work and didn't land, or Australians have seen through that. And that's clearly what the PM thinks, because he said that in his speech on Saturday night.
Time and again, we have rewarded our leaders for boldly showing strength and boldly showing empathy and kindness and compassion. I think to Fraser, when he, at the click of a finger, just saved thousands and thousands of Vietnamese refugees stuck on a rock in the middle of the Philippines, dying of thirst, and went, nah, you can come here. And like, that was a Conservative government that brought that. During the Tiananmen Square massacre, Bob Hawke allowed all the Chinese students who were staying here to stay. And I've met people like this, and I remember when I met one woman, she had a photo of Hawke on the wall of her shop, and she goes, he saved my life. I'll never forget that. And we rewarded him by we rewarded the party. He didn't got the leadership, but we rewarded the party for bringing them back. And I think, like, as much as I disagree with the years of the Howard government in so many ways, how strong do you have to be to look at your base in the eye and say, we have to take the guns away.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it. Like, how fucking strong are you? That is strength, but it is based in empathy and it's based in kindness. We value that as a country.
Yeah, and did it through the Queensland government as well, and some pretty, it was a Conservative Queensland government that got on board. We've all seen the John Oliver clip, but, there was a lot of people that lost skin because of it, but how many lives have been saved because they had the courage to do that?
And I don't see the idea of playing it as a bad thing. To be honest, I'm going to say it. I think it's un-Australian. It's un-Australian to say kindness is weak. Fuck you. It takes strength to be kind. And some of the greatest things our leaders have done have been incredibly kind and unbelievably strong to execute. And that is what makes us what we are.
And pay dividends in the long run too. That's the other part. Like, You know, that big cohort of Vietnamese Australians, there's now some of them in the parliament and lots of them that are contributing to our country. It's the same with the Chinese at Tiananmen. It's the same with John Howard. And yeah, that is the one consistent, right? It's paid dividends the whole way along.
Sometimes in an election, there's a moment that either wins it or loses it. I think of, you know, I'm an old man, but I think one of the most classic examples is Dukakis, who was on the road to winning. He got his photo taken in a fucking tank, well, you know, and that's the photo that got ran, and that was it. It was all over. Do you think there was a moment in this election that either pushed things one way or the other for the parties?
Look, it seems like when you look at the focus groups, it was the budget for some reason. Like the budget was the one that was what was a pretty mundane budget. The tax cuts were small. They hid what is a mountain of debt that's coming that has to be a real focus for how we fix that in the long run. The Liberal Party not realising how big an issue that might be. I was shocked on the night when they said they wouldn't pass on those income tax cuts to everyone. I couldn't fathom the party of Bob Menzies going to an election with a higher income tax rate than the Labor Party. It still baffles me to this day how they managed to do that. Beyond that, I don't think there was any knockout moment during the campaign. The backflip on work from home was clearly disastrous. The policy was bad. It was badly put together. The focus groups, if there were focus groups, must have told them this was going to be a problem. And having to backflip then served two purposes in that the feedback must have been coming from those handing out and those door knocking. I've heard that from them. But to then flip around on it meant that anyone that actually supported the policy felt betrayed. Anyone that hated the policy still didn't trust that you were going to do it in the long run. So that was probably the indicative moment where things were going really badly, that kind of backflip on that kind of policy.
Can I just ask you on that, as someone who's been a nerd of politics since they were a child, as you told me before, what would it take for you to see a leader changing their mind, as a leader changing their mind and not call it a backflip?
They have to explain it. Well, you look at something like the best example started last year with the stage 3 tax cuts that were coming. And the Labor government had said all along, all through the campaign, that they wouldn't change what was set up by the Morrison government. They clearly had intentions for quite a while, and I think they all admit to you privately now at least that they had this idea that they wanted to see something different, and they did. And they changed it, and they stripped away from the top tax bracket probably $4,500 worth of tax cuts and fed them through to lower tax brackets, which means effectively everyone got a tax cut again, even though stage 1 and 2 had targeted lower and middle incomes. They said, okay, now it's everyone again. That's a backflip. I don't think all backflips, as you're saying, are bad. And clearly this one wasn't when it comes to the long run for the government, but it's still reneging on what they'd said at the last election. To their credit, when they finally admitted they were doing it, a couple of days after we'd reported it, they came out, fronted up, explained it, copped the criticism, and you have to cop the criticism if that is something you are doing, and wore it and moved on. Again, no one's going to get it right every time. So it's good that people change their mind. It's like it's good when they take each other's policies. Like if it's a better policy, great, take it. I'm happy for that. I don't care, you know, who came up with the idea, as long as it's implemented. Best idea wins. This was just one this close to an election campaign when it came to that work from home that voters clearly didn't believe it. So that was the problem. You
mentioned earlier that, you know, Peter Dutton believes he's doing the right thing, and I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
However, he has spent years now avoiding people like you who will ask him tricky questions, only taking phone calls from a particularly small, count 'em on one hand kind of journo, and not being at a press conference. There was that moment where, I mean, were you in the room when everyone started, it wasn't really a stacks on, but people were really kind of starting to, you know, throw the barbecue skewers his way, and he didn't really know what to do with it? Like, if you're going to lead this party, you do have to be out there. You do have to put yourself out to the press corps. You do have to show the people that you can explain yourself.
Yeah, in two ways. You've got to be match fit, is what you're saying. And for all the criticisms of Donald Trump, that one thing he does do is he's very accessible. I mean, we've had more questions from my mate and my colleague John O'Kersley to Donald Trump than I think all of Australian press got to Joe Biden in those 4 years. But what we've now, the two parts with Peter Dutton doing that. One, you've got to be match fit. You've got to be prepared for, as you said, those moments on the campaign when things are hard and you have to defend yourself and make the argument and convince people, change people's minds. The other part is, and this is going back to that review, the problem that the modern Liberal Party face, it is akin a little way to what happened with the Conservatives in the UK and in the US. But if you are just narrowcasting to one radio station or one TV network, you get in a real bind if you're just getting high off your own supply. If it's only the people that are Liberal branch party members that are watching, and therefore they are voting on and keep electing for those positions, the people that they see on that television station, then you start appealing to those people directly, and it doesn't reflect the majority of Australians and it doesn't reflect the centre of Australian politics. And so that's one of the big challenges the Liberal Party has to have, is that they can't just become the party of Sky News and Sky News After Dark in particular. There's some great reporters over there. Some of the best in this building work there. But if you are just narrowcasting to a group of people that think in a very similar way, you can get caught thinking that way and thinking that everyone thinks that way, where they don't. And that was reflected.
Watch the third episode of the Kanye documentary. He's standing on the floor of Madison Square Garden with 160 people in the same T-shirt around him, clearly unwell, clearly needing help. No one's saying shit because they all get to wear the new Yeezys. It's a story as old as time. The closer that people get to that unbridled wealth and power, the less the word no comes up in their conversations.
Yeah, and that's a problem, right? That's why you need a good opposition.
Yes.
Because you want someone to say no to you if you're getting too far ahead. And that's a challenge. I'm sure that will come out in the review as well, that they need to broaden the party base and broaden who they speak to. Because clearly, if the single party, like the primary vote sits at 32 or 33 or it ends up, and you're only getting 1 in 3, and some of those are legacy voters that have always voted for you, you're not convincing the right people. Go on podcasts, spread the wings. I'll shout out because they're mates of mine, but the Batuta Advocate did a podcast with Jane Hume and with Angus Taylor and Susan Lee, and it was great. It personalised them. They said Jane Hume walked in there and charmed a lot of them. Get them out, show other people that you can have this mentality and this ability to connect with them, and it will go a long way. We didn't see that with Peter Dutton, in particular as leader, but the Liberal Party in general. I think that will be one of the instructions that come from that review, is that the KPI can't just be how often you preach to the converted. You have to go and convert people yourself.
I can't imagine what it would be like to wake up on Sunday morning as Anthony Albanese, because at the same time, it's both the most powerful you could ever be and also in the most danger you could ever be, because you could probably count in hours how long he's got to deliver something that we asked for on Saturday. And if that doesn't show up pretty quickly, as a country, we'd be like, oi, what happened to... And we could totally like that. What in your opinion, what needs to happen now? What do they need to start showing? What do they need to start communicating to keep us from going, hey, where's all the things?
Yeah. You're right. You think of the last people that have had this kind of power. John Howard in 2004 had both the Senate and the House. He was gone and lost his seat 3 years later. Campbell Newman won a thumping victory in Queensland when he replaced the Anna Bligh-Peter Beattie government. He was gone at the very next election. There's no Mark McGowan over in WA was state daddy over there. He had enough by the time the next election rolled around. The party still won, but he was gone on a personal note. So there's no guarantee, right? And you're right. Now there's no one else to blame in many ways. Between Labor and the Greens, they likely control the Senate. Labor has a huge majority in the House. So look at our problems we have right now, and you've got to start fixing housing. Number one, and it's the first thing Jim Chalmers said as well. well. If we can't get people in houses, or we can't make houses affordable to both buy for those that aspire to that, or at least rent and live in, then there will be a backlash. It is the biggest issue in cost of living. We've got a huge amount of debt in the country, and we've got ourselves through COVID, but there's structural stuff that has to turn around. If we're going to go through $1 trillion, and that was always going to happen at some stage, it's the interest that we're paying on that has to come from programs. That's money that could be spent on things like hospitals and schools and training and reskilling people and infrastructure and all those things that make life better. Beyond that, the Prime Minister staked his credibility and said his prime ministership will depend on his ability to deliver more bulk billing. People want to be able to go to a hospital. And then there is the issue of AI and productivity and somehow working out how we as a nation get better at producing stuff at a time when industries are sort of leaving our shores and diversifying and finding our way. Not to mention, how you deal with Donald Trump, how you deal with a rising China, with war in the Middle East and in Europe. It's still a dangerous and difficult time, as it was a week ago. He just has a whole lot more power to do something with it. And then the one we mentioned earlier, probably the biggest one, is energy. If we finally have stability when it comes to energy policy, how do you implement it? How do you roll out those poles and wires? How do you create a workable green hydrogen system that we put so much money towards and is still lots of people skeptical it actually can work? And how do you get the wind farms up, the solar panels out there, the batteries installed, and then shore up that gas supply to keep Australia going, all while keeping prices down? It's a huge challenge, just as big as it was a week ago, only now you have fewer barriers to implementing what you said you did as Prime Minister, and that's the challenge that will come. On a nerdy political note, there's going to be a lot of anxious backbenchers that would like a job and a promotion as well. That becomes a challenge for probably 18 months down the path, when that big caucus can bring big problems or big agitators as well.
So there's some political nerdery that I don't quite understand there. So the backbenchers are what, like they're in a worksite pilots. So we're talking like the apprentices or like the third years. They don't quite have their own truck yet, but they're on the side.
Exactly that. Young people, the people that have been, in the office for 3 years now, it'll be 4 or 5 or 6, and they'll say, well, I joined this to become a minister or potentially become Prime Minister because, everyone has that little burning desire in the back of their head, and I'm not going anywhere. And there's this new class that have come in, and maybe some of them are getting spoken about, and I'm being left behind. And, there's this old group who actually aren't that old age-wise, but have been there for a long time, remnants of the Gillard government that are still in power now and still in the cabinet. And the young people will be starting to ask when they're going to move on and when they get a turn, and it's hard to keep everyone happy. There's more people that will be thinking they deserve the same amount of jobs, and that makes it a little harder when it comes to managing the group. And with more people, there will never be more problems. There will be scandals. Tony Blair used to say, there will be scandal. Don't for a second think there won't be. And so it's likely that will come as well.
It does. I said this on Saturday night. I was on a, speaking of not newspapers or television, I did a live stream with Josh Zepps, Punters Politics, Aussie man. Yeah. It was awesome. But
good Newcastle guy too, right?
Yeah, he's doing great shit. And the idea that in our country, the person who becomes a leader isn't necessarily the person who's the best leader. They're just the best person at playing the game of that, getting from the back bench through the caucus rooms up to a ministerial position, and then finding their way through a spill, for example, all the way to the top job. Yeah. It's not the person who can stand like a lighthouse at Cape Byron and go, here we are, let's do this. It would be nice to see that kind of leadership win, but at this point it seems like it's horse trading and deals and shit, and that I don't know if that's the best thing for us.
No, you're right. Like, good governance should be good politics. So if you can get things done, it should see you rise. And there are examples of that where people that factionally aren't ideal or aren't aligned or aren't powerful can come through. Someone like Kevin Rudd, for all that's happened since. In 2007, he emerged because of excellent ability to communicate with Australians and without a real strong factional sort of allegiances. It's also why it was so easy for them to drag him down, which at the time seemed unprecedented, but since has seemed like the norm. So, look, there are examples when it can happen and has happened. Yeah. I'm kind of with you. Like, it would be great to see You think of our great leaders, someone like Bob Hawke, who was outside of Parliament altogether when he came in, certainly in the trade union movement, so certainly knew a bit about backroom politics. But there is, I don't know, this is the system we have. I'm not sure it's the perfect system.
No.
But I think if people are starting to think that way, that it would be great to have, outstanding leaders that can step into the mould, then they probably will at some point, because if that's what enough people want, that's who they'll vote for. We
talked earlier about why a strong opposition is vital in a democracy, and I mentioned the guns off the streets before. Despite where my ideology lies politically, some of the biggest changes in my country that have made me so proud to be an Australian have emerged from the right side of politics. We talked about the gun thing, but there was a Liberal Party seat from far north Queensland that he retired, Warren Entsch, who he is the reason that we got same-sex marriage over the line. It only takes one person to be in there and to slowly over time going, guys, we're going to have to do this. Abbott came in, he says, okay, I won't do it while you're here, but when you're gone, I'm going to keep going. Like, I really, as much as I don't agree with the ideology of the Liberals or the coalition, it's so important to have them there, because those things that really leap our country forward often come from the right. Those really big moral things that make us have that moral authority when it comes to foreign policy and things like that. Yeah,
you think of, you mentioned Tony Abbott. He, I think, famously misquoted, but it summarised it nicely that, no one side or one person is the suppository of all wisdom. That's kind of the mentality, right? That's where we're at. And Angie, excellent fella, great local member, worked so hard for that community, and you saw it in the vote. That was one of the seats that flipped on Saturday night, because Warren Entsch's name wasn't on the ticket anymore. And there's 2 times Labor's won that seat, I think, since the Howard era or during the Howard era, and that's when Warren Entsch's name wasn't on the ballot. And he came back, got the seat back. Yeah. Now he's left and the seat's gone again. So there is real opportunity. If you're a good enough local member, much like if you're a good enough leader, people will stick with you. That's been shown. The interesting thing about same-sex marriage is, like, Angie obviously drove that for a long time. Tim Wilson, who looks like he's back in the parliament, he was one of those people behind it in the Liberal Party as well. Trevor Evans, an MP that lost again on Saturday night, was there as well. The other person who was really big on that was Peter Dutton. Clearly didn't support it. I don't think he voted when the vote finally went through. I think he abstained from the vote, as did a few of those senior Liberals. But he realised at that stage, and he's a real pragmatist, that they had to get it off the table. Otherwise, they were doomed in what eventually became the Morrison miracle. So he was part of the driving force, along with the Attorney's Office at the time, behind getting that off the table, getting it through, finding a way to make it happen. Because clearly people, 61%, according to the vote, wanted to see change. You needed the internal agitating of someone like Warren Entsch. You needed the realisation or the reality of someone like Peter Dutton, who saw the value in it, in letting people have their say, otherwise they're going to punish you as the governing for it. So it comes from all sides, but you're right, without that initial agitation, then you wouldn't hear it. And that's the danger of getting high off your own supply. If only speaking to one group of people, is you don't see those outside elements, you don't get that person agitating in your ear and reminding you that there are more people in the country that might think differently. We live in a time where the White House is banning the most, banal news outlet on the planet, the Associated Press, from the White House, because they gave them a bad write-up. And that is such a dangerous thing for a functioning democracy. It is so, so important to have people like yourself who really care, able to go, hang on a second, but you said 6 months ago this and now that. Have you changed your mind? And asking the really pointy questions, because that's what we need. We need power to be held to account. Otherwise, power is just a fire hose, and who knows what's going to happen, man. So thank you. You've clearly dedicated your life to this. So thank you very, very much for doing so, because it is, knowing that people like you exist make me feel better about whatever happens, that there's someone's there to call them out if it goes wrong. And that's really, really important. Your job is as important as those people. And I hope you see it that way. That was very kind of you. Malcolm Turnbull used to say the same thing. I'm not sure if he meant it, but he used to say it at the Christmas drinks every year. And again, before, I don't want to belabor, but it's not just the people on camera or writing. There's a whole crew and a whole team of really talented, for me, it's cameramen and photographers and editors, producers that make all this happen. So whilst, there's a penchant to look at individual, particularly in this age of where reporters can, not me, but others can become quite famous and stars. It's important to realise there's a whole team and it's not just one person against the world. And that's a good thing as well, because the suppository of all wisdom thing doesn't come here as well.
If you're working with a camo that can't see something is about to happen, you miss the shot of Mark Latham shaking John Howard's hand. The camo could see it coming. If you watch the raw footage, you see him reframe and get ready. All right. Yeah. And without that, you've got no story. And that moment doesn't exist. And that moment like that changed a lot in our country. And so, you're absolutely right. If I was Ricky Stewart, I would speak in the third person. So Ricky Stewart really hopes that Ricky Stewart can get those Raiders all the way to that grand final for you.
Ricky Stewart and Charles Croucher as well. Don't worry.
Absolute legend. Thanks for making the time to speak to us in what must be, I hope you just get a nap. But there's work to be done, as Albo said.
A combination of a salad and a sleep are going to go really well at some point.
Salad and sleep. I love it.
Appreciate it, mate.